There's a storyline going around the Manning Center right now that nobody's talking about. They're all worried about quarterbacks and chemistry and all of this other stuff. So, what is actually on Lane Kiffin's mind? Stick around, we'll tell you.
You are Locked On Ole Miss, your daily podcast on the Ole Miss Rebels, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcast, including YouTube. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every single day. Hello, I'm Stephen Willis, and this is the Locked On Ole Miss podcast. Full disclosure, this was recorded before practice last night. We are going to do an extra episode later in the afternoon that discuss what happened for practice on Thursday night, the second practice of fall camp. But right now, this is going to be a little bit different. We're going to talk about what's on Lane Kiffin's mind going into this season. What is he thinking about? What keeps him up at night? We'll talk about that a little bit. We'll do a Cedric Beavers breakdown, and we'll do viewer mail, which has been an unbelievably successful addition to the podcast as well. But before we get started, I do want to let you know about our Discord server. Our Discord server, you can go there. It's a community of Ole Miss fans. It works like a chat room, essentially, and you can get in there and talk about Ole Miss football if anything's going on. There's always seemingly somebody talking about something, but it's a way for you to expand your fanhood. The link for the Discord server will be in the description, but come on aboard. We're almost up at 200 members as we record this show, and you will be much appreciated. So thank you very much. We'll see you there. Let the adventure begin. So Lane Kiffin at Media Day, and not SEC Media Days, at Media Day, that's where the Ole Miss media goes around and gets a whole bunch of players and the coaches and all that. There's one thing that was just a common thread that kept popping up by Lane Kiffin during the day. And we're going to play a couple of sound bites in just a second of where this was an example. And that was the end of last season. And we don't want to relitigate what happened. Okay, I'm not worried about that necessarily. But Lane Kiffin being worried about the way the team played at the end of the year is noteworthy. That is something we should keep an eye on. And whenever you have a team full of transfers, a team full of new players, and I think I saw the Ole Miss Spirit had a tweet out, there was like 60 newcomers for this year's team. There's always a threat that the team can be front runners. And what I mean by that is whenever things are going good, they're fine. But as soon as things go bad, it just kind of all falls apart and you can't pick up the pieces back together. So we'll discuss that a little bit later on as well. But I'm more interested in the fact that Lane Kiffin kept bringing up unannounced the end of last season. Here we go.
I don't spend a lot of time on that. That's so far down the road, and people want to say, okay, well, win this many games or whatever, finish this place in the conference. That's like, there's too many variables. You want to coach really well and play really well. And sometimes that means this many wins, and sometimes the ball hits the upright and doesn't go in, or a ref misses a call. So I know at the end of the day, it's about wins and losses, okay? But from a coaching standpoint, it's about coaching really well and getting our guys to play really well and be hard to beat. I think last year at the end, we weren't hard to beat because we turned the ball over. We didn't get turnovers. We were horrible in the red zone. We gave people too many easy plays. And to me, when you're a really good team, you're coached really well, you're playing really well, you're hard to beat. You may lose some games, but you got to play really well to beat us. And I do not feel like that was the case at the end of the season. Ideally, yeah. I think that is the blueprint to win over a long period of time is not to redo your roster every year through the portal, in my opinion. You're going to have ups and downs doing that. No different than if you rebuild all the time through free agency and don't draft well. So that is not the ideal way to do it. I'm just maximizing the situation we're in. Each year changes depending on where you're at, what your situation is, how many guys went in. But I don't know. if you, again, I can't talk specifics, if you see better players are signing here out of high school now, I think maybe it's a couple years of having on-field success, especially a really good run for, a year and a half until the end of last year. Like I told our guys, every year is different, and we didn't play well down the stretch, but at the same time too, guys, we're 8-1 with the ball in the red zone to beat Alabama to go to 9-1. So there were some good things being done there, and I think recruits have seen that. And so I do feel like we are getting better high school player attention now.
Lane Kiffin talking about how they weren't hard to beat at the end of the year. They kind of let go of the rope. They did a lot of stuff that allowed other teams to come and just kind of take them away. This was a program and a team that was in the red zone, as Lane Kiffin said, with a chance to go 9-1 with a victory over Alabama. Now, if you ask me what happened in those games, I think the last two games, they kind of let go of the rope a little bit because that circus was involved and everything was happening. Okay. I'm not going to relitigate it. I'm just saying that it happened. But against LSU and Bama, if Zach Evans is healthy for both of those games, I think Ole Miss wins those games. And when Ole Miss lost to Bama the way they did, the team was already down. The team was already in a way that was kind of detrimental to their growth, essentially. And Arkansas just kind of popped them. This defense was not good against the run. That was a very good running team with KJ Jefferson and Raheem Sanders. And they kind of just got them. They jumped on them. There was a couple early holding penalties on touchdown passes. It was weird because Ole Miss ended up running for like 400 and something yards in that game with 200-yard rushers. So, and then the whole thing with the Egg Bowl, that 2-week period between Fayetteville and Thanksgiving night was just weird. And they didn't play very well. They didn't execute very well. They played like a team that had let go of the rope. Now, I'm not criticizing them at all. Just saying what happened. So the message for Lane Kiffin and what is on his mind and what you can take from what's going on is he doesn't want that to happen again. So if you look at the end of the last season, starting with the LSU game, Ole Miss dropped that game against LSU. Remember, that second half got a little bit weird. They beat Texas A&M, actually beat them more convincingly than the score. The ball was in the air in the red zone on fourth down at the end of the game against Alabama. Ole Miss was in that game. The Arkansas game was just weird, absolutely bizarre. And that was the heart of when all those Auburn rumors were happening. And then they kind of let go of the rope against Mississippi State. And the bowl game, I don't even want to talk about the bowl game. If you listen to my podcast after the bowl game, you know exactly how I feel about that game. And that has not changed. So we will see what happens. But knowing how that season ended and how Lane Kiffin is quick to point out, last year and a half has been really good, that type of stuff, you can tell this kind of gets at him. This kind of eats at him a little bit. And I think this is the motivation that Lane Kiffin is going to take to make the quarterback room a little better. He's already done that. To improve the chemistry through events. He's going to figure out a way to try and bring the group closer knit than it was the team last year. Lane Kiffin also admitted that Ole Miss has to, basically they're required to do the transfer portal at this moment. And it would not be Lane Kiffin's preferred method of recruiting, but Ole Miss has to do it because, as Lane Kiffin says, the system is in place. It's kind of jacked up, but we would be dumb to not take advantage of it. So he's going to keep doing the transfer portal. He is going to keep trying to figure out a way to give his teams advantage at the end of the year. Last year's schedule was bizarre. I think last year's schedule was more difficult than this year's schedule. I'm not talking about replacing Kentucky with Georgia. Nobody is going to think anything if Lane Kiffin loses to Georgia, but going to Tuscaloosa, to Jordan-Hare Stadium, to Athens, Georgia, it builds up this year. And then if you look at last year's schedule, you have Alabama. It's at home, but it's right after A&M and right before Arkansas and Fayetteville, which we never win in Fayetteville, 5 days before Mississippi State. It was just a recipe for a disaster for Ole Miss football last season. So, in summation, basically, nobody is talking about the fact that Lane Kiffin appears to be hyper motivated, and the last 5 games of the season are clearly on his mind. And I think that's a pretty big thing. If he is working so hard to just like, what happened? Why did this go on? What needs to happen? If that is his thought process, that's probably everybody wins that is an Ole Miss fan. And we will see exactly how it goes. We'll see exactly how it goes because, I mean, honestly, we're about 4 weeks away from finding out exactly how it goes. Anyway, today's show is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. You want to be 100% certain that you have access to the best qualified candidates available. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right people for your team faster and for free. We all know about creating a social media profile. We do it everywhere now. There's social networks popping up like weeds at the moment. Well, LinkedIn Jobs is asking that you create another one. But as a bonus, you can create a purple hashtag hiring frame for that profile, and you can spread the word that you're in fact hiring. It's got simple tools like screening questions that make it easy to focus on the candidates with just the right skills and experience so you can quickly prioritize who you'd like to interview and hire. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified people you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. All right. Thanks for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. For your second listen, check out Locked On SEC. And every dayers, we are going to continue to go down the road for fall camp. A little bit later on this afternoon, we're planning on doing an extra show once we hear and kind of gather information from Thursday night's practice. But as it sits right now, you're going to have to put up with me. I know. But I do want to say thank you for making us the Ole Miss Morning Show. That's a really cool thing, indeed. So Ole Miss picked up a commitment last week from Cedric Beavers. Here's his profile. It's kind of a dead profile, and I put it up here for a reason, okay? If you look at Cedric Beavers' profile, he's a JUCO out of Jones College, Jones County Junior College. I'm not exactly sure what it's called at the moment. He's hardly rated by On3. But he's rated as a borderline 4-star by On3. Now, the reason I put this up, okay, is used to Ole Miss and Mississippi State and heck, half the world recruited Mississippi JUCOs. Since the age of the transfer portal, people have shifted over to that, and our attention has shifted over to that. It's important to realize that JUCO players are just as talented as they were before the transfer portal opened. It's the same players there. You just don't get the coverage that you used to get. And what I want to say about that is the people that were covering JUCO players before are now going into the portal and trying to figure out what's going on there. So that leaves kind of an empty space in the Kansas and Mississippi JUCOs, the California JUCOs, and all those players that were counting on that to get to high major schools, Power 5 type schools. Now it's a little bit more tricky for them to get there because those schools are concentrating on the transfer portal. Coverage is towards the transfer portal. JUCOs are at a severe disadvantage. Now, I tell you all that to tell you this. Lane Kiffin has an unbelievable recruiting strategy. I tell people all the time, he recruits to the 85, not the 25. And what I mean is he's recruiting based on class needs and team needs based off of this particular recruiting class. You might look at this year's, the class of 2024 that they're doing, and they are currently 29th in the country. But if you look down at it and you dig down deep into it, the defensive line class is one of the better ones that have been committed to Ole Miss in the last 20 years. There's other players that's going to add. And what Lane Kiffin does, he draws a red line on the board, watches film, and makes an evaluation. If you are above that line, he will recruit you. If you are below it, he will not. And it doesn't matter if you're high school, transfer portal, JUCO, Canadian, who else. It doesn't matter. Because as we know, that he did go up and find 2 players that are playing in the NFL right now in Canada. So I'm not saying trust the coaches in this situation, but I'm saying trust the coaches and evaluations. It's just the type of recruiting that they have to do, because however he needs to make the current roster better each year, he is going to do, whether it is high school, transfer portal, JUCO, it doesn't matter. So if you look at the highlights for Cedric Beaver, I say all that to say this. You have somebody that is absolutely gifted, just a really gifted football player. Now, I can tell you where he needs to get a little bit better, and I think he will. He is somebody that is completely squared up on the line of scrimmage. He's low profile. He's not really fast out of his stance. In fact, he gets beat off the line more times than he doesn't on this video. But once the route gets going, his makeup speed and his athleticism are so good that he's able to be an effective cornerback even with the way that starts. I mean, that's an interesting situation. His ball skills are really good. He's a typical Mississippi JUCO corner. Mississippi State and Ole Miss and Southern Miss have made a living off of Mississippi JUCO corners. I mean, we just over and over and over again. But you have somebody that makes plays here. You have somebody that does the things that you are hoping will happen at the cornerback position. Now, remember this as well. Ole Miss this year has a ton of people that play quarterback at the FBS level. Whether they played at Liberty or Miami or Ohio, I'm not talking about that level. I'm talking about at the FBS level. They have nearly a 3 deep. And if you just look at the starters like DeAndre Prince and Zamari Walton, that is a pretty good set to go. But with transfers and everything coming in, a lot of this class are rentals. You'll have them for 1 football season and they'll be gone. So Pete Golding has to build the class based off of what he needs next year. And the way to do that is to kind of turn over rocks in places that people aren't looking. And right now, in positions like this, it's the Mississippi JUCO ranks. You have some talent. You have some pretty well-coached teams. You have some decent JUCO facilities, and you have some players that every year late bloomers come out of. So don't overlook young Cedric Beavers and him being recruited to Ole Miss. I think he has a chance to be really good. I think with the Chris Graves out of Miami, and you have people like Jaden Kennedy and those guys with extra years of eligibility, you can see how they're building up a team that can compete for the future. Pretty fired up indeed. I really like Cedric Beavers. His profile is deceiving. And if people is going to look at just the profile, it's like, okay, just look at that. You would say, oh, okay, no, not Cedric Beavers. That doesn't matter. But if you look at his huddle film, like we just did, you can see that the pieces to be an extremely effective SEC cornerback exists. You got a player that can do all the things you want him to do. There's one thing that I can see just immediately jumps off the film. I want to see him at the beginning of the play, the cornerback equivalent of a get off, to be a little bit more quick twitch and faster, beat the receiver to where he wants to go. Maybe if you're more very pro jam or something to where you're trying to compete with the wide receiver, that would help him out a little bit. I think whenever he's not jamming and he's just playing really tight man, the slowness can get him a little bit. So we'll see once Ole Miss gets him up to Oxford, what improvements can be made as well. I do want to let you know that today's show is brought to you by eBay Motors. For a championship team, it's all about making sure every player is the perfect fit. You know, it's the same when it comes to your vehicle. Every part needs to fit just right. So the next time you need parts and accessories, head to eBay Motors. With eBay's guaranteed fit, you can be sure that every part you need fits right the first time around. Just add your ride to My Garage and look for that green check to know that your part will fit. or your money back. Because just like in sports, confidence is the name of the game when you shop on eBay Motors. And with over 122 million parts to choose from, you'll be back in the game in no time. After all, it's easy to bring home a win when the right parts are guaranteed. So get the right parts, the right fit, and the right prices on ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. eBay's guaranteed fit is only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. Thanks again for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcast, including YouTube. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every single day. Hi, I'm Stephen Willis, and this is the Locked On Ole Miss podcast, and we're going to do a little viewer mail. This has been a segment that we have honestly done every day for the last 2 weeks, and it's been a pretty good fit as our views have continued to climb and all of that. So we are going to continue to do it as long as there is a demand for it. And we'll start off right here with a question off YouTube. This is from Willis9542. Fun fact, this is an account that was created in the very beginning to troll me. And we actually kind of became friends on the comment section. It's pretty good. How many of the quarterbacks do you think will take snaps this season? Remember back when Corral was playing with busted ankles? Now, there's a privilege to sit a quarterback to rehab an injury properly. If an injury happens, like tweaked ankle, hamstring, do we think we see another quarterback for a couple of weeks instead of playing through injuries? This is a good question, Willis. It really is. I think that Jaxson Dart is likely going to be the dude. If you ask me right now, who is going to be the dude throughout fall camp, I'm going to say it's going to be Jaxson Dart. But if Jaxson went down, would they do like they did with Matt Corral, or would they just let him get better? And I think we have the benefit of having high-level backups at a level that Ole Miss hasn't had in 60 years. And that would allow them to sit him down. Now, the question is, who is Ole Miss playing? Because if Jaxson Dart pulls his hamstring a little bit or twists his ankle a little bit against Tulane, I think Jaxson Dart would probably sit against Georgia Tech. If that happened before the ULM game, he would probably sit in that game, and they would try and get him ready for the state game. Now, if the next game was LSU, if it happened in the Alabama game and LSU was happening, I don't know. I don't know. What is the threshold would be an interesting thought process for what that would happen, because I think it would, but I only think it would in certain games. Also, I think the number one quarterback that would come in the mop-up time in the fall, this is my opinion, would be Walker Howard. I think Walker Howard's going to play a little bit this year, and I think they're going to use him in mop-up time to get reps, because if everything goes right, and I'm not saying this is going to happen, I'm saying this is the goal and this could happen, and Jaxson Dart goes pro, you want to have Walker Howard in the best possible position for the 2024 season and the playoff. That's what I think about that, and it should be quite interesting as well. All right, Delta Omega on Discord asks, with so many transfers coming in, what is something these players, coaches can do on and off the field to build camaraderie that a team unquestionably needs? Now, that's an excellent question, Delta Omega, or Dega Omega. I'm assuming that's a Talladega reference. You have to hit me up on Discord and let me know. So, fall camp and what they're going through right now. Now, in the old days, back a million years ago, whenever I was in that building and we were doing true two-a-days and all of that stuff, two-a-days was a big part for team building. It was a major part for the season in team building, because when you have a whole bunch of people going through something that extreme and the Mississippi heat in August and all of that, it does force them to kind of come together, especially whenever the coaches, it just happens. They turn into the enemy for the day, even though there are coaches and the players on the same team. Players coalesce and come together because they blame the coaches for what's going on. Now, without two-a-days, that's become a little bit more difficult. So you will see Ole Miss over the course of the next 4 weeks, you'll see them have a pool day to where the team goes out. They'll on a day that they were supposed to practice. I'm making air quotes right now because this has been planned for 2 months. Go out there for it, have a pool day. Maybe a cookout gets had. Maybe they get video games and pinball machines and all that brought into the facility. You might laugh, but stuff like that happens. And that is designed to get the team all together to where cliques can form. Because the irony of it is there's not one team. We always talk about team chemistry. What you want is larger style cliques to develop within that team that can lead that team. Because there's certain players that's never going to join up. But if you can have enough player to be the dominant force behind that group of players, you have a chance to be extremely effective. And I think they can do it through the ways that I just told you. But fall camp is still going to you're going to need days when you're practicing out in that hot heat. I hope they don't use the indoor too much in the fall because of what's going on. All right, now our third question, we got Football Guy 34. And he asked the question, how crazy is the idea of 11-1 and second in the West for this Rebels team? Now, okay, first thing is I think Football Guy 34 might be a troll. So I'm not going to really delve into the 11-1 and second in the West. Although if Ole Miss goes 11-1, they're not finishing second in the West. They're winning the West because that one will be against Georgia, which means they would have beaten every other SEC West team. So, but I don't ever want to tell people not to anything is unrealistic because there's no such thing as a realistic hypothetical. Those don't match up. In your head, you have a set of probabilities of how things can happen. You might look at the roster right now and see exactly what's going on. And you're like, okay, I see 10 wins based off of the data points that I saw last year. I see 9 wins based on the data points that I saw last year. Depending on what's going on is going to affect your hypotheticals. But there's no such thing as a realistic hypothetical at this point when there's no data available for you to realistically make a prediction on. Honestly, other than the fact that Georgia is going to be really good, Alabama is going to be tough, and LSU is going to be tough, you don't know what Ole Miss will do in those 3 games. Is Ole Miss going to go 0-3? Is Ole Miss going to go 2-1? Is Ole Miss going to go 1-2? And those are the 3 games that you should be the most sure about what you can expect to get. But until the season starts and things starts to happen, you might have a situation before the Alabama game or the LSU game where their quarterback goes out, or the Georgia game even. You don't know how exactly these games are going to fall in line. We do predictions, we do W's and L's, we do all that stuff to have a good time because we enjoy talking about Ole Miss football. It's fun. We like doing hypotheticals. But in a situation to where there's no such thing as a realistic hypothetical. All right. So if you say 11-1 or 10-2, you will be labeled a fan. And there's certain people that triggers for whatever reason. But I don't think a fan and having hope and putting hope in your coverage is necessarily a bad thing. People don't come to my site for news. I'm living in Winter Haven, Florida. Why would they? They come here for perspectives and commentary and hope for me to tell exactly what I see and commentate on it. Now, the biggest bias that's in the media or analysts or anybody that can fall victim to is money. That is the biggest thing. Whenever you get into the business of your takes being shaped by whatever is going to elicit the biggest response or reaction so that you can build subscribers to your newspaper or website or whatever, that is probably a more toxic bias than simply a hope bias. Every single person has bias. There's no way that they can unbiased cover a team. There's no way that can happen. Your opinions are always going to shape what you write. It's going to shape your personality and what you see. That's just the way that the media works, and it has for 200 years at this point. So have your expectations. Have your ideas. If you think that Ole Miss can go 11-1 this year, do it. I am not going to tell you they can't, because there's no such thing as realistic expectations without data points for anything. In your head, there's probabilities to where you think this team can get. But that is all based off of your opinion, all in your head. So I'm not going to call it crazy. I'm not going to tell anyone how to be a fan. But this is an example, if this is a real post, of the energy and optimism surrounding this team and the potential that this team could display. I'm pretty fired up. I got on a soapbox a little bit there. I went on a little bit of a rant, but I hate somebody who says I am being realistic. Off of what? What are you basing that on? You're basing that on last year, which means you're just giving an opinion and a guess. Because 1 year does not mean a hill of beans realistically when it comes to the second year. One season does not affect the second year. The games do not matter as far as 2022 to 2023. The way that Ole Miss ended the season in 2022 does not affect one bit how they will go into the season. Now, statistically, whenever we look at it as fans, we can go back and find trends based on the statistics at hand. But that's always in hindsight. It's never a predictive measure. If it was a predictive measure, you could just go to Vegas and make boatloads of money, and there would be billionaires all over the place. And honestly, there wouldn't be a sports gambling industry. So enjoy the game. Have fun. It should be a lot of fun. Have whatever predictions you want to have. And of course, join the Locked On Ole Miss podcast and Discord group. I'll put the Discord up again. The link's always in the description. We will have it up during the month of August. September 1st, it goes away. The Mercer game, it becomes a private message board. We do Discord live every Tuesday night to where we just talk Ole Miss football back and forth. It's kind of like Twitter Spaces. The board works like a chat room. You can thread it. It's a little bit different. It's a little bit intimidating. But if you do it and get the hang of it, it's actually a pretty entertaining medium as well. So I want to see you over at the Discord server. We're almost at 200 subscribers to that server now. We're well over 4,000 on the YouTube channel, and we are absolutely whipping butt on audio downloads at the moment. So that is pretty cool indeed as well. But thank you very much for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcast, including YouTube. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day there's a little bit later on today. We will do a video on last night's practice. You're not going to miss anything. It's just going to be a little bit later. That practice is slated to end somewhere in the neighborhood of about 9:30 or 10, which means all of that would happen. I would get to bed way after midnight. And with a 7 o'clock in the morning Eastern show, 6 o'clock in the morning show, I had to record early. But we will get you the extra video that we can talk about how practice is going as well. So until tomorrow, or actually later on today, I'll see you then. Hotty toddy.